Chapter 15, page 232. Bumblebees and Babyface Nelson. Behind Uncle George and Aunt Madeline's house sat an old abandoned DeSoto coupe. It was old, very old. The relic was so ancient it had fat teardrop headlights on top of its fenders. Weather-beaten and rusting into the ground, it would never see a highway again. The endless years of blazing sun streaming through the windshield had faded and cracked the old yellow steering wheel. Jauntily bolted to the wheel was a turning knob. In the center of the cheap chrome beauty was a red plastic ruby. The reason I remember that steering knob so well was because of the traumatic incident that happened that day. The old car had been setting there for years on flat, dry, cracked tires. It had nasty, faded, water-stained cloth seats, sun-bleached all across the top. When you climbed inside, it smelled hot, musty, and dusty like an old attic in an abandoned house. It wasn't pleasant, but it was free, and someone else thought so too. It was the perfect place for bumblebees to build a nest. One hot summer day, my cousins and I were playing gangsters in the old car, pretending we were driving around Chicago, shooting everything up. Actually, the old car was never going to move again because there was a tree growing out of its radiator. We didn't let that slight inconvenience stop us from roaring down the narrow alleys as the cops gave chase, and we threw our bank robbery money out the window just for fun. I was Babyface Nelson and shot my plastic machine gun out the window while yanking the steering knob and making tire screeching sounds. Butchie sat next to me, and he was my wingman, covering my right. He was shooting a fluorescent green squirt gun at the kitchen window on the back of the house. Aunt Madeline was waving to us as she washed dishes and jumped every time she was shot. I thought it odd you would shoot your own mother, but hey, we were desperados on the run. We had already robbed 3 banks, and we had 2 to go. The other boys were in the back seat, screaming and jumping up and down, and we were having the time of our lives. That's when the bumblebees got pissed off. They came roiling out of that old seat like gangbusters, and we were the gang they were going to bust. We were making so much noise and having such a good time. Butchie and I were oblivious to what was happening until everyone in the back seat began desperately trying to climb to the front. Suddenly the air was filled with kicking feet, screaming kids, and swarming bees. I bailed out of the car, and the boys were right behind me. As we ran to the house, Bobby wasn't fast enough and was soon surrounded by angry, stinging bumblebees. In a panic, I grabbed an old straw broom and violently beat the bees around his head as he fell to the ground. I got stung on the neck and forehead, and it drove me into a frenzy. I beat the hell out of those bees as they tried to land on Bobby, not realizing I was beating the hell out of him, too. I pounded and pounded as the tears and snot flew everywhere. Suddenly, Aunt Madeline rushed out and covered us in a big blanket, and we all ran inside. Knocking empty beer bottles everywhere, we tripped and struggled to the kitchen, crying all the way. She went right to work and treated our stings with melted ice cubes. Bobby had taken the worst of it. Between me and the bees, he looked like a pink volleyball with ears. Tough little turd he was. Every time he grinned, his eyes disappeared. As I lay on the floor, leaning against the stove, Butchie sat right against me. He smiled and whispered, "Them damn coppers shot us up pretty good, huh, boss?" I grinned back and didn't say a thing. From then on, in my mind, the only good bumblebee was a dead bumblebee. The selection you have just heard is from the book 140 Ivory by Travis Cougar Johnson.